Good afternoon. I'm Robert Pondiscio. I'm a senior fellow in education policy here at AEI. Thanks for joining us for today's discussion on the case for curriculum. The occasion for this discussion today is a paper that I wrote for Stanford University's Hoover Institute with that title, The Case for Curriculum. It was published today over at the 74. You can take a look at that. But if I'm being candid, the paper could just as easily have been titled The Case for Making Teaching Doable by Mere Mortals. For at least a quarter of a century, the logic of the education reform era has been teachers know what to do. They just need to be held accountable for doing it. That's the implicit logic, I think, of the standards and testing model and associated reforms, such as moves to enhance teacher quality or pay for performance or whatnot. But as the work of Emily Hanford on the science of reading and academic studies by Tom Kane of Harvard and others seem to suggest, we can't always be sure that teachers and schools really are using best practices and high quality materials or being adequately trained in their use. Even reforms like Common Core state standards were largely silent on curricular content. But one reason to consider curriculum as a reform lever is the effects of the absence of doing so. Data from the RAND Corporation, for example, shows that almost every teacher in America, 99% of elementary teachers, 96% of secondary teachers, draws upon, quote, materials that I developed and or selected myself in teaching English language arts, for example. An MDR study shows that teachers spend 7 hours per week searching for instructional resources and another 5 hours per week creating their own classroom materials. That's 12 hours not spent on studying student work, giving feedback, building relationships with students and parents, and many other potentially higher value activities. Plus, the available evidence suggests that when teachers create or select their own materials, it lowers rigor. A 2019 University of Southern California study of the quality of supplemental materials that teachers downloaded from various websites, such as Share My Lesson or Teachers Pay Teachers, showed, quote, a major mismatch between what content experts think educators should and shouldn't use in classrooms and what teachers hungry for instructional resources are choosing to download, end quote. Most materials in that study were rated either mediocre or probably not worth using. On the other hand, Tom Kane of Harvard looked at math textbook adoptions in 6 states over 3 different school years and found, in his words, little evidence of differences in average math achievement growth in schools using different elementary math curricula. However, while the vast majority of teachers use their school's official curriculum in more than half of their lessons, few use it exclusively. And according to Tom Kane, only modest amounts of teacher professional development was on the adopted textbooks and curriculum. What this suggests, at least to me, is that curriculum is a bit of an afterthought, not a serious reform lever. For example, if it were a serious reform lever, it would be a central feature of professional development for teachers. So in conclusion, as I wrote in this paper, hours spent on customizing curriculum or creating units and lessons from scratch is burdensome. It results in lessons of low rigor and quality, and it's almost certainly a less valuable use of teacher time than studying student work, giving feedback, developing subject matter expertise, building relationships with students and their families. The bespoke nature of instructional planning is a standard feature of the American teacher's job, but that one that is lacking in evidence of efficacy. We'll discuss that and some other topics today. Here to discuss it is a first-rate panel of experts and good friends. David Steiner is the executive director of the Johns Hopkins Institute for Education Policy and a professor of education at Johns Hopkins University. He currently is on the board of and was the founder of the Relay Graduate School of Education. As New York State Commissioner of Education, David Steiner took a lead role in the state's $700 million Race to the Top application to support the redesign of state standards, assessments, and teacher certification requirements. His insistence on including major funding for curricula in that grant led to the launch of Engage New York, which is the nation's most consulted online curriculum resource. Kristen McQuillan is a partner at TNTP, and there she leads projects focused on academic strategy, implementation of high-quality curricular materials, and continuous improvement. She's led projects with school systems in 20 states across the country. She currently focuses on leading partnerships in her home state of Maryland. Before her work at TNTP, Dr. McQuillan spent over a decade working for the Baltimore City Public School System as a teacher and a district administrator, and 8 years as a faculty associate at Johns Hopkins University School of Education. Orlando Riddick is also with us today. He is a division superintendent in the Houston Independent School System. He served as superintendent of Midland ISD and Cedar Hill ISD and worked in the central office administration for Mesquite ISD. He was also with the Dallas ISD, where he was chief of schools and chief of high schools at Houston ISD. Previously, his educational background includes stints teaching at Antonio Maceo Smith High School and serving as principal of W.T. White High School in Dallas ISD. He was also assistant principal and academic dean at several schools in Fort Worth and San Antonio. And last but not least, Barbara Davidson is an education industry executive with deep hands-on experience in K-12 education policy, practice, and operations. She started her career in education as a teacher of learning disabled students in Norfolk, Virginia, has trained teachers on behalf of 2 educational publishing companies, as well as serving in key leadership positions at the U.S. Department of Education under 2 secretaries of education. She has led StandardsWork in executing high-profile projects on behalf of numerous bodies, including the U.S. Department of Education, the National Assessment Governing Board, and the Center for Education Reform. By the way, at the end, there will be audience Q&A. You can submit your questions via email to riley.fletcher@aei.org. That email address is on the event flyer. Or if you're on Twitter, you can submit your questions with the hashtag AEI curriculum. Well, let's jump in here. Kristen McQuillan, I'm going to start with you. You probably have more experience than most, if not all, people in this work, in actually on the ground working with teachers and districts and implementation. If my thesis here is correct, that there is some resistance to curriculum as a reform lever, you probably have a better perspective on that than most. So this is your opportunity to say, yeah, I'm reading the situation correctly, or no, I'm wrong. What's the view in your 20-state experience?
Well, thanks for having me. I love talking about this. And I would say that you are partially correct, Robert. In thinking about how teachers typically respond, it's a little bit of a tricky question because what I've seen in my work is that it's usually a mixed bag. So you're going to see everything from educators from relief and enthusiasm because they're excited for new materials and the possibility that comes with those materials, to resistance and even at times grief, because letting go of old materials and old instructional practices are often tightly coupled with teachers' identities and how they feel about their work and their professional life. So you've got a mixed bag. And what we know from a change leadership perspective, what I encourage leaders to do is to embrace teachers wherever they are at, right? And to actually spend time and plan to spend time and energy investing folks in the materials and sort of selling them on the why of the materials and helping them to understand why curriculum is a necessary lever within our school improvement work.
Great. Orlando Riddick, I've had the pleasure of making a couple of visits to Houston in the last couple of months to see the work of the so-called new education system under Superintendent Mike Miles, the so-called NES schools. If memory serves, you are overseeing more of those NES schools than any other division chief in Houston. So you too have kind of a front row view of getting teachers to change their practice, to take curriculum seriously. Can you describe for us the role of curriculum in that NES system in Houston's package of reforms?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm getting what Kristen has in regards to the array of what teachers go through, emotionally from top to bottom. And now I'm at the implementation aspect for what that looks like. And our goal surrounded around, if we're going to get this work right and get it leveraged in a way that we can make true whole-scale systemic reform, high-quality curriculum had to be an aspect of one of the levers that we had to pull. So it was about what can we go to as our package of items that we can have a standardization around. So we didn't get teachers pulling from a variety of resources, not knowing the high quality, low quality of what that could look like, or about the amount of time that they would invest into what that would look like around creating their curriculum resources. So it was important that our scholars on day in and day out had first access to what we deemed to be what was going to be solid and what was going to be good. So it was a development internally around utilizing these resources that we have out there. And there are a number of them that our state has vetted to say this we know has science-based implementations behind it, such as, RLA items, math items that were out there. I'm not going to speak to them specifically because I want to just speak to them in a generic way right now. So we have all these individual items, and our team was brought in to develop what this could look like to push out to teachers to say, okay, here's a package. And this is where Kristen was leaning in. Here's your package of items. We've leaned in very heavily to differentiate this work. We've leaned in very heavily to think about what we call what's tier one first teach going to be like, and here are the resources that you will use for it. Here's embedded within it will be a PowerPoint deck that we built for you that goes along with this work. Here's the scope and sequence or the curriculum items that we're going to be pulling that are taken from the state to say these are the standards that are being taught that we need to focus our attention around. Now it's about the implementation once you get this whole package of information and the delivery. And that's where we've had to work to share that if we're going to do all this front loading and all this work, and if we're going to make copies, if we're going to get these PowerPoint decks built for you, we need the teacher to be able to lean in around that. And the lean in part was two terms that we have, which is customization and internalization. So how do you demo this lesson? So we built time for teachers to demonstrate this lesson amongst their peers, to look for where opportunities and gaps that might be had during their professional learning community time or after school during this demonstration of learning. And then how do you then begin to internalize this lesson so you really feel like you know it? And then how do you want to customize it with things that you have? So there's really this whole art and science that tries to balance what we want from teachers who have a high skill set and teachers who are novices that walk in for the very first time into the classroom who are trying to determine, okay, what next and how do I differentiate for my learners who need me the most and those who are advancing quickly through the knowledge of information.
And just to follow up quickly, Orlando, I haven't been to many NES schools, probably about half a dozen or so, at least elementary schools. I'm just curious, when this was rolled out, the typical thing that you hear is, oh, you're trying to take away my autonomy. How much resistance was there to this idea that here's the essentially created lesson, this is what you're going to teach?
There was noise that crafted around that, and within the new education system schools and outside and within the community that you're taking, this piece away from teachers, and teachers should have this autonomy to come in and deliver their craft in a way that they have the subject matter expertise around. What we find is that that may not be the case every single time, and the amount of effort and time that teachers are spending to create this is pretty intense. And could we take that lift so that we could really help teachers get to what we want them to do best, which is the craft of the delivery of the lesson and the scaffolds and the internalization that we want to make sure that kids understand and learn. And then how can we differentiate that with the number of learners that we have, whether it be emergent bilingual, special ed, GT. So how can we help maximize what that could look like in a classroom where we say differentiate, but teachers just think that means louder, faster, or more, right? And there's not this whole aspect of how do you really differentiate the work for team members that are in your classroom.
Got it. Barbara, you probably have visited more schools. I mean, every time I look at you on social media, you're in a different school somewhere. You've got a very enviable job. You're traveling across the country, spending an awful lot of time in schools that have not just, I guess, adopted, but have embraced high quality instructional materials. And I know that you've been a curriculum advocate for even longer than I have been. Do you detect any changes at large in the field in terms of curriculum status as a reform lever?
Yeah, no question, Robert. You appropriately note that I have been at this for a long time. The gray hair is a testament.
That's not what I meant.
And I see huge change. As a matter of fact, I don't think in the 35 years that I've been sort of at this work, curriculum status has ever been, sort of more primary. I think, there are major school districts. My own school district here in Maryland, which is the 16th or 14th largest in the nation, Montgomery County, has just adopted a curriculum, and a good one at that. Baltimore, as Kristen and David well know, Dallas, Denver, Clark County, Gwinnett, some of the largest school districts in the country are adopting core comprehensive curriculum. And that's just a game changer. And kudos to you for your report. It's really brilliant. And I would encourage everybody listening to give it a good read. I think there are reasons, Robert, why this has happened. Until we had common or near common standards, it just wasn't possible, to really develop curriculum in the way that we're now talking about it, in the way that we now expect that curriculum shows up. Publishers, working artfully to develop lessons in the way that we now expect them to. They wouldn't have done that, when they're sort of trying to chase 50 different sets of standards and doing so just through kind of this coverage of standards approach, as opposed to really artfully developing lessons that can that integrate the standards and bake in the many different tools that teachers need in order to meet all children's needs and so forth. Philanthropy has gotten behind the curriculum cause in a big way, and that's been vitally important. Not only has philanthropy helped to support the development of some open source curriculum, and that's been important, but they have supported some work at states. There's a very important network of states, 13 of them, that have been working together for the past 7 years under the aegis of the Council of Chief State School Officers, who are really studying what it looks like to take, and not just studying, but working with districts throughout their state to really promote this curriculum cause and incenting districts to adopt high quality instructional materials, and understanding what's really involved in supporting that through professional learning. The philanthropy has also been a big part of creating a marketplace for the kind of professional learning organizations that are really invaluable to districts as they go about this work. So I really think it's been the result of sort of policy, advocacy, market-driven forces, and so forth, that has put us in this place where we are now, where you can advocate, as you well did in the paper that you wrote, that our best education reform efforts really are at the instructional level, and I think the other thing, and we'll have some time to talk about this a little bit more, I hope, in some follow-up. But the other thing that's happening is that once teachers start using these curricula and teaching in this way, and reap the benefits that Orlando was talking about, of not having to spend all of their effort in creating curriculum, but instead in learning how to be masters of delivering great curriculum, and that's that's hard work. That's enough right there, to really well use a good curriculum, and to do so in a way that not just a few people in the district, but everybody in the district is doing it. But once they start tasting that, they won't go back. I mean, we hear this throughout our school tour, and I hope we'll have a chance to talk a little bit more about that, what all the many benefits to teachers are for sort of going this way.
Great, thank you. David, I saved you for last because I've been joking lately that I being, there's some flaw in my character that means that I have to be the skunk at every picnic that I go to. And today I'm going to cede that role to you. Because I know that you have written on more than one occasion. When you've been studying all of this for quite a long time, but is it fair to say you are skeptical of the mere procurement of HQIM? And I know that you've written more than once about the tendency, as I think you say, for HQIM to stay on the shelf even once it's adopted. Can you unpack that for us a little bit?
Sure. I mean, first of all, it is when well used and thoughtfully used, it's a very important element of good education. Let's just state that. At the same time, we have not seen a major impact. Let's just state that too. Sure. We have oases of districts that have done well. But if you take a state like Louisiana that made a very major commitment some years ago to bringing in good quality curriculum, it's been bumpy. We have unpublished research that basically says if you do a scatter diagram, it's all over the lot. Some districts that adopt seem to have improvements, others don't. Net, you can argue about what the data says. Now, why is this? It turns out that procurement is very much the first step, not the last, right? And the kind of thing Orlando's speaking about, which is a full court press, thoughtful, multi-level, multi-tiered, involving different professionals working very carefully. Many districts just don't have the capacity, or certainly don't think they have the capacity to just deliver on this. So let me give you an example. The first thing that happens after procurement in many districts I've visited is that the teachers simply don't believe that the students can manage the rigorous materials. They look at it and they say, wait a minute. The second thing that happens in districts where you're 3-4 years into procurement is more subtle but equally negative, which is that the teachers have agreed innerly to use the curriculum. They follow it. They ask the question that the curriculum tells them to ask, and then they answer the question. Again and again, what I have seen is almost no cognitive lift on the part of students in the face of the more challenging questions that the curriculum would like you to wrestle with. So the more challenging the question, the more likely it is that the teacher doesn't allow students to struggle with it. And then the next thing that happens is the teacher simplifies the question, right? I have seen this again and again and again, including recently. I've been in middle schools for several periods in the last 6 months, and this was everywhere. So the resistance has many levels, if I can put it that way, or the lack of help, putting it another way round, has not been sufficient, has not been sophisticated. There are other problems too. I'm going to be very brief about these. For example, because of the way largely David Coleman was the architect of our ELA Common Core standards, and the ELA high quality curriculum have to follow, right, the Common Core standards, even though states don't claim to be using them anymore. Of course they are. Right. They changed 3% and called them something else. Well, as you all know, the Common Core standards in ELA call for a whole set of skills, like find the main idea. Yeah. And we now know, I think people will object to what I'm about to say, but in many cases, there is no such skill. You either understand what the text is about or you don't. If you do, you find the main idea. But the more destructive part of it is that treating a text like something to be solved, like a mathematical equation, David's expression, Coleman's was the detective, right? Solve the case, actually goes a long way to damaging any inherent interest in studying the text. And so the other problem you see is this very mechanistic approach to reading to learn, where they are following the curriculum. The curriculum have no choice because they have to follow the dictum of the standards. So that is a particular problem in ELA. And then the last thing I'll say is that you can't just adopt the swimming lesson analogy, right? The swimming lesson analogy is just drop the kid in the pool, right? And hope the kid figures out how to swim, right? And be ready to dive in very quickly if she doesn't. There are many, many urban school systems where the kids at 7th grade are at 4th grade. They're 3 years behind, easily. It's very easy for academics and people and all of us to sort of say, well, just use the new curriculum, right? Just use your beautiful 7th grade curriculum. Well, you try it, right? You watch good teachers try and do that with kids who are 3 years behind in math, where, as we know from many, many studies, math skills are cumulative, right? If you're missing crucial math skills, you're in real trouble. And if you don't have a system that has offered very good diagnostics, differential instruction, rigorous tutoring, right, you have to be on the side of a teacher who says, what are you thinking?
Yeah.
Right? So major problems, not to say it's not important, don't mishear me. I was passionate about launching this, as you kindly referenced, but let's not assume one more time that it's a silver bullet and then give up on it when it doesn't give us the NAEP results that we don't see yet.
Yeah, I think that is a danger. Well, I want to talk specifically about that in a moment. But Kristen, I noticed that while Dr. Steiner was talking, you were nodding an awful lot, which I take to mean that you have firsthand experiences with the phenomenon that he just described.
I sure do. Yeah, it's not easy, and nobody has said that it is. I think, you know, there's a number of ways to approach the phenomenon that Dr. Steiner is talking about. I think it starts with helping educators understand the larger vision for the materials, right? So the materials are not actually the goal. They're not an end to themselves. They are a tool that is, I would argue, absolutely necessary and critical to the larger goals that we have for students, that students have for themselves, right? And part of the vision for those materials is that it's not just about what you're teaching at your grade level. It's about what's happening before the students get to you, where they're going after. That was a big part of the reason why I left the classroom. I saw my 7th and 8th grade students in 11th grade, and they really hadn't gained that much. And it was really hard for me to grapple with that. And I think that's when I really started to think deeply about curriculum. There's so many things in this field that we, as you wisely point out, Robert, that are just really pretty far away from us being able to impact them. But curriculum does feel like a lever that we can pull, that we can work around. To your point, Dr. Steiner, it is not going to be an easy lever to pull, but we do think that we're seeing some growth, not as widespread as we want to, but just as Barbara said, I mean, I'm really seeing some shifts around the country. One of the things that we encourage our leaders to do, folks like Orlando, who's leading this work, one thing that we encourage them to think about and sort of like selling the initiative is to actually, as I alluded to earlier, meet teachers where they are and to actually say, it's okay, you might not be totally bought in on this curriculum yet, right? So I worked with a kindergarten teacher who wasn't bought in, and I said, let's just give it 8 weeks and I'll co-teach some lessons with you and let's see where this goes. A similar 4th grade teacher, we did the same thing with some writing work. And it was amazing because by November, this kindergarten teacher was saying, oh my gosh, Kristen, I have never seen this many kids reading this quickly. Wait a minute, what's happening here? And that progress kicks in and they feel excited by their student success, and it motivates them to keep doing the tough work that is really trying to figure out how we meet kids where they are. And with that 4th grade teacher, she's a good friend of mine, you might know her, Katie Scotty. She keeps a Post-it note on her desk of something that a student sent to her. And that student said, Mrs. Scotty, I always thought I was a bad writer, but it turns out I just didn't know what to write about. And so Katie said, well, there's no turning back now. Teachers are very motivated by their students' success. So as hard as the work is, I think if you can sort of get educators who sort of universally care about their students' success to start succeeding with that curriculum initiative, not to say it'll get you all the way there, but it might give you the energy and momentum that you're looking for to keep the reform sustaining and moving forward.
Yeah. Kristen, I love what you just said about the materials are not the goal. I wish I'd thought to say that in reporting that I've been doing lately on Houston for Education Next, for a forthcoming piece. I've made several visits, probably visited at least a couple of dozen elementary school classrooms. And as I'm thinking about it right now, I don't think I could tell you the subject of a single lesson that I observed. Because what I was struck by, and I want to have Orlando either tell me that I'm reading this correctly or not. What was interesting to me in the observations I did in Houston was that having the curriculum, the centrally created curriculum, changed what the teacher did. Now the NES structure, and I don't want to speak for Orlando, is structured. And you'll tell me if I've got this wrong, 35 minutes of direct instruction, a 10-minute demonstration of learning, then you physically differentiate kids by either having them stay in the room for a reteach or to go to another spot for enrichment or advancement. But it also requires the NES system, what, every 4 minutes or so, a teacher has to do one of these multiple response strategies, or if you like, a check for understanding. But it felt to me like the teachers were a lot more deliberate in their practice because they were not spending their time. It wasn't the lesson, to Kristen's point. The material was not the goal. The teaching was the goal. Am I reading that correctly, Orlando?
No, you're spot on around that, Robert. And thank you for the time that you spent coming in and observing and seeing what this looks like. And I think David and Kristen are leaning in areas that say, hey, listen, we've seen it, and we've seen it, it's spotty, we've seen it work, and we've seen it have to build that capacity. And I think that's where we leaned in heavily also to say we have a framework. And that's all it is. It's a framework, it's high quality. If you buy into it, we can really help you and we can walk side by side with you through this work. And so working with our principals and our administrators to be in that classroom, helping to coach, having a side by side in regards to ensuring that the delivery is set up. It's been, I think scripted and prescriptive to share that there's a way that we can hit this balance. And I think that's what we're trying to find is how do we meet this balance around this expectation of what we want from our kids who are sitting with us, and how can we develop the teacher who's working and developing the information that's coming through on the curriculum that's being designed to help them give this lift. And so, yes, there's this point where we call it the first teach, tier 1 instruction that's delivered. There's this check for understanding throughout. There's this aggressive monitoring that's occurring that allows the teacher to know where kids and how kids are moving through this information piece. There's this conversation that's happening with kids in the classroom. And then there's an assessment that's given after the first delivery of instruction to say, okay, how did kids perform? If you did really well, we want the advanced learner to stay and continue to move in their advanced learning. And we have them leave to go to another area with another teacher to support them in their advanced learning on a more rigorous assignment. The kids who stay back, we call it the second teach. This is where the work and the demonstration of learning and all the capacity that's built in for the professional learning communities comes in, because this is where you have to really start navigating your scaffolding. Not that you didn't do it before, but this is where you have to really lean in heavily with the kids who didn't get it, that you now get to spend another 30 minutes with these students to build in what David had mentioned as this differentiated instructional time that you need. So kids are getting the rigor. You're not lowering the grade level, because I think that's what David refers to, that it gets tough. And I don't want you to struggle. I don't want to struggle. So let me lower it. And we all feel good because we're all getting it. But now a student who's behind is getting less rigor on their grade level, and that we cannot have. So we keep it at grade level, and then we return the students or keep the students in the classroom who are not able to move forward to give them their second teach. On a Friday, it's extended, that period gets extended, and we call it our third teach. So we think and assess throughout the week how students have performed or not, and then we bring back that information into a third teach opportunity to really help drive it home for kiddos during this time. It's building teacher capacity and leveraging their understanding around the art and the science around how those two come together to deliver what's best for kids.
Yep. David, you wanted to say, wait in
very quickly, and then Barbara, I just hope our watchers or listeners internalize from Orlando's comments just how challenging this is.
Yeah.
To organize a district, particularly a large urban district, to do this at scale, I've never seen, right? I'll just be frank. They are trying. Let me give them absolute credit. They are trying. The differentiation, the acceleration, the reteach, the structures to make this work are causing enormous challenges for our districts, and we can only hope that we'll all get better at it.
Yep, well said. As I reflect on my own kind of journey to becoming somebody who was, I was going to say a curriculum advocate, maybe curriculum fetishist is not too strong of a word. It comes back to one of my formative experiences teaching at PS 277 in the South Bronx, and it was, a Lucy Calkins Readers and Writers Workshop class. And I will never forget the day that my staff developer, when in my naivete, I was a mid-career switcher. I was nearly 40 years old the first time I taught fifth grade. asking her, again, in my naivete, what's my curriculum? What am I supposed to teach? And she said to me earnestly, well, Mr. Pondiscio, you're the best person to know what every child needs. And I promise you, I thought she was making fun of me in a gentle way. I didn't realize that was the pedagogy, but honestly, it occurred to me then, and still, I'm not the best person to know what a fifth grader in the South Bronx or anyplace else needs to know. So it felt to me that I would have been a much better teacher. I could have focused on my craft if I didn't have to spend that. It wasn't 12 hours in my case, it was probably 20 or 30 a week then Google and Pinterest looking for what am I going to teach tomorrow. And that's a segue to Barbara Davidson, because we know this is the de facto working week of the vast majority of American teachers. I think that from memory, the data from RAND is like 98% of ELA teachers use at least in part material that they create or at least curate themselves. That's what we think good teaching is, right? Like that was the message behind my staff developer all those years ago. Oh, you're the one. The magic here is you're going to discover what each child needs, and you're going to put just the right book in their hand, and that's the thing that's going to make them great readers. So how much, Barbara, is that culture of teaching, that bespoke nature? That when we tell teachers that they alone are the person that can inspire the kid, how big of a problem is that, and how hard is that going to be to overcome?
Well, I think it's a big problem. I don't know that I think it's going to be that hard to overcome because of the fundamental conviction that I have, and that I've seen, repeated time and time again when we've been out on the school tour, that once you taste doing it a different way, it's pretty easy to give that, to give that up. But it is without a doubt, Robert, what teachers are taught in their teacher preparation. That they're sort of their version of a performance assessment at the end of their teacher, experience, teacher training experience is lesson plans, and we're finding across the country in places where teachers are going into districts where they have curriculum, this tension between having been taught to, that it's all about creating the best lesson plan, and then they're going into places where there's actually good curriculum, and they don't have to do that, and so that's an interesting development too. But as I think about it now, I mean, it's just kind of crazy what we've been putting on teachers, and they are seeing it when they taste it a different way. An elementary teacher doing 180 days of lesson plans in ELA and another 180 days of lesson plans in math, and the smattering, little bit that they give to science and social studies. It's just it was a crazy expectation. So I think that what I'm gratified by is when folks are introduced to a different way of doing it, they're really pretty enthusiastic, and that they're willing to give up that role of writers of the score, and really delighted to be given the time that frees up, not just in their preparation, but in how they go about the the professional learning work that they do with colleagues and so forth. They are delighted to be able to purpose that toward examining student work, and dialoguing with colleagues, and in colleagues' classrooms watching a lesson that they're going to be delivering tomorrow, and really being able to become masters in that way. I've visited over 50 school districts around the country over the past 6 years as a part of this Knowledge Matters school tour. And I always ask teachers in the panels that we have questions about how, now we're visiting districts that have adopted great curriculum, and learning from them about what, really was involved in that journey for them. And we asked them how, on a scale of 1 to 10, how enthusiastic were you about this decision to adopt this, change the way business is being done, and adopt this curriculum that you're going to learn and be expected to follow, in some cases pretty, and in some cases, at least the narrative that preceded the adoption was that it was a pretty scripted curriculum. I think most of them have most teachers end up discovering that they're not quite as scripted as they might have thought.
Yeah.
But where were you on a scale of 1 to 10? And people, some there's a range. there's often the folk that know what they've been doing hasn't been working, and see this as a commitment by the district to invest in them and to support them. There are folks that say, you know, I don't mind telling you, on a scale of 1 to 10, I was a 2. I was pretty resistant, or I felt like this was just the other next best thing, you know, that everybody was saying was gonna save education. But it doesn't take long, as Kristen said, it doesn't take long at all. I mean, usually by the end of the first semester, teachers are saying, wow, I feel so much more supported. They're getting the value of that collaboration with colleagues. They're seeing how these familiar routines are gonna yield benefits, not only for them in their practice, but for students in terms of being able to experience it. Many more things that I could tick off in terms of specific examples about why it's why they're becoming fans. But the fact is, I think that they are, and I don't think that it will take so very long for us to see that, you know, happening at scale across the country as people are having. Now, to David's point, yeah, we got to provide lots of support so that this is, they are not just, the curriculum isn't just thrown at them. And that really, really is the work ahead for us. There's no question about it.
Yeah, I'm very struck by the Tom Kane paper, and David and Tom Kane have written about this, if I'm not mistaken, about how relatively little professional development is curriculum specific. In other words, if this were central to our work, well, then we spend a heck of a lot more time on curriculum specific PD. David, I mean, am I correct about that? And are we seeing?
Yeah, the finding that we wrote about, which was in Tom's original research, was that on average, nationally, with new math curriculum, teachers get a day and a breakfast. Right. And when they are on average 12-year veterans, that's the national average, 12 to 13 years, you're not going to change what you've done for over a decade because you get a few hours of talk at you, right? I mean, this is naive. It reminds me of the old Guinness ad in England. I don't like it because I haven't tried it, right? I mean, it's going to take a lot of sips before you like Guinness. I think the problems here go back to systemic issues, right? Other countries have national curriculum, right? That's absolutely right. Or their provincial curriculum. But they also, their teacher prep programs prepare the teachers already to teach that material. So by day 1 in the classroom, they're deeply familiar with it, right? Because there's a national agreed or provincial agreed curriculum. Then the assessments assess the student's study of that curriculum, right? That is the fundamental triangle in almost all industrialized advanced countries. And yet we have these 3 things in silos, right? Teacher prep is doing goodness knows what. I mean, some of us do know, sadly. Then we have curriculum, which still, right? There's not one curriculum. Louisiana's the closest, but in most states, it's still hundreds, right? And then we have tests that have to be curriculum agnostic, right? So the system doesn't work. It's fragmented, as I've suggested elsewhere. And I think part of the problem is that because it's a fragmented system, we invest a lot rightly in the good pieces of it, but we are undermining ourselves as a nation by not putting the pieces together, right? So everything has to work harder. It's like a car with flat tire, right? I mean, the engine may be great, but if the tires aren't, you get the point. So we've really stacked up the whole thing against ourselves. One more example, we have the widest variety of teacher effectiveness inside any given school, one of the widest in the world. We're not very different from other countries when it comes to differences between schools. Right? There are stronger schools and weaker schools. We are way off the charts when it comes to the variety of effectiveness within a school. So one of the great questions is, can a good curriculum, right, raise the floor, right, towards the ceiling? In other words, can it narrow and raise at the same time the gap of effectiveness between teachers in the same school? That is the $800 billion question, to take what we spend a year on public education, because that is killing us, right? The quality of your kid's education is totally dependent on who she happens to get as a teacher, more than even the school she's in, right? And so that where the curriculum can do all of this heavy lifting in a system that is so broken is really a difficult challenge.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right, David. And I sometimes irritate my fellow curriculum fans by pointing out that that it's not just a simple matter of the curriculum, that there are I can't remember the analogy you used, but there are the pieces do not work together, and it's not just a simple matter of just the I mean, I have very strong feelings about good, better, and best in terms of curriculum, but we're not there yet. Before I forget, we're going to go to questions in a moment. You can either send them to riley.fletcher@aei.org, or you can send them via Twitter or X at #AEI curriculum. Kristen, I have long believed that the soul of teaching is not lesson design, it's lesson delivery, it's diagnosis, it's the ability to study student work, that intellectual preparation that you see some good schools doing. And that all of this time that teachers spend customizing or creating curriculum materials is time to be better spent doing those other things. Is that any part of the discussion in the work that you do with the schools that you've worked with?
Yeah, it's absolutely part of the discussion. And as I think we're alluding to in this discussion, curriculum is, I frame it for leaders as a necessary, but ultimately insufficient lever for improvement. And so what we like to do is actually hang all of our curricular efforts inside of a conceptual framework for change. And any conceptual framework for change will tell you what we know, which is there are multiple levers. Investment is one of them, motivation, skills, all of those things matter. And so it is necessary but insufficient to only adopt curriculum, as we saw in the Keynes study. But I do see it, and I should say by the evidence in the field is showing this, that it is a tremendous opportunity to reframe for teachers the way that they spend their time, and for school organizations to actually reframe professional learning. I just did a presentation on this where I compared teachers to maestros, right? To conductors, right? They don't write the symphony, right? They internalize and develop a relationship with the content to ultimately create something really beautiful. And I think that we are doing ourselves a disservice when we don't lift the profession up in that way and frame it in that way. I will say, if I could, because I think it's important, decades of human economics research have shown that for organizations, not just school organizations, to get a return on their investment with professional learning, there needs to be a mix of both portable skills training and firm-specific training when it comes to professional roles. So what that means is portable skills are things that are going to translate across roles. Firm-specific are, what does this look like in my day-to-day? So for teachers, I think that looks like knowing the pedagogy, knowing things like the science of reading, but also having curriculum-based professional learning where they understand, here's how this plays out in my materials. Here's how I can promote orthographic mapping through chaining, right? Orlando, that's the work that you guys are doing in that internalization process. And another RAND study showed that teachers really do not appreciate PD and coaching, but they do appreciate collaboration. And so curriculum-based professional learning is a way to help not just teachers, but school leaders really ground that collaboration and hang it on something meaningful. And so in that way, I think this is a tremendous opportunity that's supported both by the research and the literature, and from what teachers are asking us for in the field when they say, we actually want more time to collaborate around our work, and this can be something that we use as a centerpiece to do that.
Great. Let's take a few questions from our audience, and these are jump balls. Whoever wants to take them, please do. Question: I've heard the estimate that it takes on average 3 years after a new curriculum is adopted before teachers can implement it with fidelity and confidence. Does that estimate sound accurate in your experience? And if so, what steps could leaders take to make that new adoption happen faster, especially with teacher turnover?
It all depends. All depends on the leadership of the district, the leadership of the school, the structure of the PD. But I defer to people who are in the schools right now.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Go ahead.
Go ahead,
Oh,
Orlando.
thank you, Orlando. I would just simply say I agree that it all depends, and yet I also would not think that it has to take that long. We've been in districts, when we started the Knowledge Matters school tour, we would only go into districts that had been using curricula for about 3 years because we thought that, it was going to take that long to see some really praiseworthy things and things that the field would want to hear about that worked. But we've been going into a lot of places that are at the end of first year of implementation or the beginning of their second and seeing some pretty amazing things happening. So, but David named it leadership, a lot of other things too, but it ain't going to happen without leadership, both at the district and the building level.
Agree both ways that it takes that implementation from the superintendent that works all the way through the system to ensure that we're going to all buy in and all know it really well to make this delivery. I will tell you, we are 10 months in, and I believe maybe Barbara had shared that teachers now would not go back to what they were doing before based on what they have right now. So it's leveraging itself in the right way. And it's difficult and it's tough and it's challenging. And there are amazing opportunities that are coming forward. I don't believe it will be a 3-year implementation process. I believe it will depend on the leadership that we have that's driving this work right now. And it will be much sooner around the full scale implementation around what we're doing on the delivery of curriculum. We're more than halfway through where I believe districts that may take 5 years to implement this type of work. We've done several years worth of work within the 10 months of time to leverage what it looks like to help urban kids and urban communities really move fast and catch their peers in surrounding areas. So excited about that. I don't think it's a 3-year plan.
I will also just add that I think this is where leading indicators are really important. It can take a while for state test scores to move, but in the work that I've done with districts, we say, what is success gonna look like sooner? How is the student experience going to change? My favorite story that I tell is I knew student experiences were changing for a group of students when I saw them on the playground playing animal adaptations that they had been learning about in their unit. That's probably not showing up on test scores yet, but we know that their level of engagement, their level of knowledge, their vocabulary, how they feel about themselves as students, and the knowledge that they are building is changing. So you have to, as a school system leader, look at what are the leading indicators that we're going to look at. We help folks do that. They're not as scientific as assessments, but that doesn't mean that you can't measure progress along the way. And then in continuous improvement, you're also going to look for ways that you can make adjustments because you're probably not going to get it exactly right the first time. That's okay. That's where you use your structures to make those adjustments to keep moving forward.
Thank you. David Steiner alluded to this earlier, but I'm really curious to get both Kristen and Orlando's take on this question because I'm guessing you have dealt with this dynamic. How do you specifically respond to teachers and school leaders who say their students can't access the content of a core curriculum due to their immense learning gaps? What's the answer to that? That's a legitimate question, and it's a hard question.
Oh, absolutely. And I will tell you that it comes in with me knowing that every student has this capability of doing tremendous things. So it's about setting a standard, and it's about not yielding and relenting from that standard and holding it. So if we're going to do grade level, we're going to do grade level. And then we're going to scaffold for students during that time. We're going to aggressively monitor and think through what are the prescriptions that kids need. And we're going to call out positive content to say, hey, I love how Orlando is, and putting that information and spreading that out in the classroom and working on the teacher to know that it can be done. And then you got to have these wins. And so these wins go from these benchmarks that are developed. So we have a beginning of the year benchmark, and then we see what the middle of the year looks like after we've delivered instruction. And you see this growth and you see this achievement start to occur. And then you start to get this belief that, you know what, kids can meet and exceed this expectation. So when you have a student who understands what their target scale is and they exceed what that scale is, that begins to share and show that kids have the capability to do it. We just have to have a belief to release it and share that. So now it's about instilling that in teachers every day and to principal leaders every day and to administrators who are walking in the classroom as my expectation that they're in every day to help coach and help support what this looks like as we're doing this whole scale reform.
The good news is we've massively undertaught American students for so long that there's massive untapped potential, right? They can learn far, far more than we've been teaching them. The problem comes more in math, right, where there's a whole slew of missed skills that really do have to be taught to grasp the current standard. This gets worse at higher grade levels for obvious reasons. And also 7th, 8th graders in inner cities and rural and elsewhere who never learned to read properly, right? So there are real challenges. It can't all be done with, with strategy. Sometimes you really need more time. You need intensive tutoring and not just half an hour a week, right? You've really got to be all hands on deck.
Right. Kristen, go ahead and talk
And
about those
Robert,
conversations.
just real quick, and that's the
Please.
beauty of the model, because the model applies that intensive work that happens for intervention every period. So after the first teach, the class is divided up, the kids stay back. That happens with every class. So it's a 90-minute block where 30 of it is built around intervention across every period that the student goes through. So that helps leverage what David's speaking to is you've got to be able to catch kids up because we know you're behind. We know what we've got to do to help accelerate where you're at and build this time in. So I can't get you on Saturday. I can't get you after school. I'm not going to take you out of your favorite elective so that we can, or miss recess so we can do this.
Yep. I would encourage, I don't want to invite guests on your behalf, Orlando, but you've been very kind in opening your doors to me. And I think a lot of us have a lot to learn from the way you're operationalizing this in the NES schools. Kristen, just real quick, can you tell me about those conversations you've had when the teacher says, look, my kids can't do this?
Yeah, it's a real challenge, right? So you do have to be tactical here. That's kind of the fun part of my job. I'm a sports fan, I'm a coach. So I'm like, okay, how do we do this? I will say quickly, that's why the materials matter so much to me. Strong materials build in what we call low floor, high ceiling tasks. So that means I saw one today. I was in a kindergarten classroom today where we had some students who, even in kindergarten at this point in the year, were probably behind where they should be, but there were entry points within that task for those kids. And it was so well designed that students who were flying high with grade level skills were also able to do more within that task. So a lot of it takes breaking down the tasks with teachers and figuring out what the appropriate scaffolds and entry points will be. Another favorite strategy that I like to take on is sometimes I hear this from teachers in schools where students don't have as much unfinished learning as you might think. So I like to go coach at, a Title I school or a school where folks perceive that it's more challenging and pull out some student writing and bring it back to that school and say, what grade level do you think this is from? And oftentimes they're guessing 4th grade, 5th grade. No, these are 2nd graders. And these were 2nd graders from that school down the road, across the bridge. And so these kids could do it again, it was really hard work. I'm not saying this is easy. I hold you in esteem, but if we get the work right, there are ways to get kids, even kids with a lot of unfinished learning, access right away and get them into the good stuff, because a lot of times the alternative is just not all that great either.
Great. Hey, David, I was going to ask you I meant to ask you this question earlier, but maybe it's a good question to end on. When you were New York State Commissioner, if I'm not mistaken, you were the only state chief who built his or her race to the top application around curriculum. Why did you do that?
We had Common Core standards and nothing to give the teachers to teach, right? So we implemented nationwide, almost. A few states stood out, but we sort of imposed these standards and said, good luck. And that struck me as actually unethical. We at least had to make available, right, materials that would match those standards. And we can close by saying, look, if we can get one part of the tripod right, we've just got teacher prep and assessment to go. Maybe one day we'll be in a system where those three things actually work together. And then the curriculum work, which is essential, let me end with that, it is essential, very difficult and essential, will really be able to realize its full potential.
Well said. From your lips to God's ears, David Steiner. Boy, I want to thank all of you. This has just been a terrific conversation. Thank you, Barbara Davidson, Orlando Riddick, Kristen McQuillan, and David Steiner. And thanks to you, our audience. We will see you again next month when I believe we're going to be talking about sports in schools. So stay tuned for that. Thanks again and have a great afternoon.